CAD-116, Basic AutoCAD, Joe Cerrone, Alan Rosen. We're going to look at Module 9 in creating this machine block. Module 9 in D2L covers section views and graphic patterns. If we go to the Content tab, and we go to Module 9, we have this mechanical lab that's required, and then we have the architectural lab. And you can alternate if you prefer to do the architectural lab, but we're only going to require one lab, either mechanical or architectural. There are video tutorials of each of these labs. The architectural lab shows how to do the two-dimensional drawing with the hatch patterns of this exterior wall section. And the mechanical lab shows how to create this section view. And then the second video, 3D, shows how to create the 3D view of this section. And here's additional videos. If we click on the link for hatching gradients and boundaries, we'll get the OaktonCAD website for Module 9. And AutoCAD does a really great job of working with hatch patterns. It's somewhat artistic in its abilities compared to some of the other CAD softwares, as you can see from this residential building plan. When we work with these hatch patterns, we have the ability to use this hatch tool, and that hatch tool then allows us to select these different hatch patterns. And so, for example, this side elevation of a house has a AR shingles for the roof. It has a brick hatch pattern, it has a siding hatch pattern, and a concrete hatch pattern. And they're pretty easy to use. They're pretty self-explanatory. If you go into the boundary hatch command, you can choose the hatch pattern, and then you can select the area to fill with that. So if I come back here to this part and I go to model space, and if we wanted to hatch this view, we would go under the Home tab to the boundary hatch command. And then what it wants us to do is to pick an internal point. So we can pick an internal point on the drawing, and pick another internal point. And then we can tweak the settings of the hatch pattern. So right now we have this ANSI 131 pattern. I could change it, go back to it, and I can change the scale. The scale seems to be the biggest thing, that all of these hatch patterns have unique scale patterns, and so they don't always translate as easily. So one thing that you can do, that I do quite often, is a match properties. And so what happens is, if I'm not sure what the hatch pattern was here, I'll match it, and then I just clone it rather than to dig through the properties and everything like that, which you can do by right-clicking and going to the properties, and it'll tell you what the hatch pattern is. And, probably need to go into the more detailed properties tab, but and so as we apply these different hatch patterns, you have the ribbon, and then you can go into some additional details in the hatch pattern. Hatches section lines are used to show interior details of a part. And so, for example, this mechanical part here is a full section. In other words, it's cut in half. And then where the saw would cut through the part, it shows the hatch pattern. this would be considered an offset section where the hatch pattern or where the cutting plane zigzags through the part, because what's important here is the interior details so that they can understand what type of geometry is required for these holes. An offset section, oftentimes they'll show this in a rotated view to make that more clear. Otherwise, this would be foreshortened. And then revolve section will be where we'll take a hatch or we'll cut through a part, and then we can either break it out or we can put it in place. But it shows the interior detail or the shape of that extrusion. There's quite a few things. Hatch patterns really make your drawings look good. They add detail elements relatively easy. You know, here's a hatch pattern of the brick detail. And then here's another technique, which is kind of neat, where you can use the draw order and you can hatch in a solid color and then hatch again in a brick pattern. And you can set the draw order so that the brick is on top of the color, and it's a nice technique. Same thing for gradient fill, where you can go and do something like kitchen cabinets. Adds a little bit of color to it, has these highlights. Some other things within the hatch commands is to be able to use these patterns and to be able to get them to, it will actually kind of alternate and jump between geometries. And we can explore that as we look at this island detection setting. There is a nice, easy drawing here if you want to practice with it. And so if you wanted to, you could download and open this drawing from Lake County CAD Consultants. This was from when I worked up at College of Lake County. Let's just see for old time's sake when it was created. And so this drawing is quite vintage. Created October 27th, 1993. And as you can see, the 2020 version still opens these older versions of the drawing. What we could do is we could go through and fill these different hatch patterns. Okay, and so for example, 0.7 by 24 ANSI 32. We come over here and let's go with this purple color, and then we'll go with our hatch pattern. ANSI 32, ANSI 132 or 32, and you just hover there. And then for the scale, what we would say would be 0.7. And then green check mark it. And then if we wanted to do ANSI 131, we come back here to the hatch pattern. Let's go with a different color. One too many. And then ANSI 137. If you don't see the hatch pattern listed, you can hit this down arrow. And then lastly, if we want to go with this herringbone, and see, this is an example of how you can see how the scale just doesn't allow you to see. And so we have to bring this down to 0.02. And it seems to be sort of the biggest problem with some of these. And then green check mark. And then these are closed polylines. They're just rectangular shapes that will fill with these different hatch patterns. And it's basically a chart showing their sales in thousands of dollars back in the early millennium. It's obviously been updated because if it's a 93 drawing and we're in 2005, so maybe there's a little something there with the time command. So that's an example of how to use the hatch patterns. And that would be the general design component. All of the Oakton CAD-116 has sort of a general design, and then it also has a task or a lab, and those are typically architectural or mechanical. You can control the origin, so you can get really picky about how you want the hatch patterns and the origin set for those. If you have text, there is a option that allows you to go around the text. Chapter 9, exercise for the exterior wall section. The PDF is right here. We used to use this Harnessing AutoCAD book for many, many years. And so if we click on that, those of you who are doing the architectural assignment, it's a very step-by-step, where it has you go through set up the drawing, architectural units, limits, grid, snap, layers, and then create the geometry, apply the hatch patterns, and apply the annotation. The textbook has the following learning objectives: to identify section techniques, add graphic patterns, use Design Center, use tool palettes, and edit existing hatch patterns. It's a lot of the same things. So it's just some different ways to do the same thing as you look at some of these other techniques like Design Center or tool palettes. Section views, okay, basically provide a view of the internal features of an object. And again, you know, similar examples: architectural, mechanical. Architects will use it for exterior elevations, things like the windows. It really just kind of dresses up the drawing nicely. And then an example of a section plan with concrete footing. And there are different types of sections, as I talked about in Oakton CAD: full sections, offset sections, aligned sections, revolved and removed, broken out sections. Using the hatch command, hatch, B-hatch, same way to do the same thing, different ways to do the same thing rather. Specify the boundaries, and so it kind of floods the area. So when you try to hatch something, it has to be a closed boundary, or at least has to have, it can't have any gaps, or it will leak out and start to hatch the entire drawing. Here's the island detection options. Setting up the boundary objects so it only hatches within the boundary. Text. Actually, that's a boundary object. And then some mechanical drawings, and this is kind of like a lever that holds something. Again, you can't have any gaps or it will leak out. And then the different hatch patterns that you can choose with AutoCAD. Some examples. The solid command basically just colors everything in solid. adjusting the drawing scale of the hatch patterns. Annotations, we annotated hatch patterns, annotated dimensioning we cover in the second class. It allows you to automatically scale the hatch patterns based on viewports. And then just some additional settings, background colors, transparencies, hatching on top of hatching. Gradient fill. That was how I was doing the kitchen cabinets. Here's a nice pond, lake, pool, oasis. And then some of the options within the hatch pattern. Draw order. We saw a good example of that with the fireplace and the colored brick. Use source origin point allows you to be able to align those hatch patterns. And typically I'll use this match properties to just copy existing patterns, because you'll get drawings from other people and you'll have to go through and figure out how they did it. But the quickest way is to use the match properties. Using palettes, okay, it's the same thing. You just drag off the pattern that you want. And on the previous slide, this was how to use Design Center, and it's the same thing. You just drag off the pattern that you want. It's a more visual way to work with these CAD softwares. Editing patterns, you can copy them, you can erase the boundaries. If you modify the boundaries, the hatch will fill in. So that would be a modification. Object stretch, circle removed. Centering the objects using grips. I don't do a lot of that. Most of the time I'm pretty happy with it right out of the box. Mirroring a hatch pattern. And that basically covers how to apply these different hatch patterns. The questions at the end of the chapter aren't required. I do get quite a few people that do go through all the details, and they do help for the quizzes for the basic AutoCAD. So Module 9, if we look at it, the exercise is to go through these hatch boundaries and gradients. Since there's already existing videos within the D2L, we can go through and play the videos for how to do the slab 9. It goes through top to bottom, how to create it. It's not a real difficult part drawing to do. The only difficult part is over here with the 3D. And it's not too difficult. It's just a press pull or an extrusion. And then there's plenty of additional details. If you want to do additional work, you're welcome to it. Or additional work from the book. There's all kinds of problems at the end of the book. If you're stuck at home and you need a checkerboard, here you go. You can make your own. If you have a 3D printer, you can even print your pieces. So it's kind of neat. Another graphic chart. So that's basically the lecture on working with hatch patterns and sections. You can download and create the Lake County CAD Consultants for the general design. Place that in the assignments folder for Module 9, and then work on the mechanical part and place that in the Dropbox. We're at Module 9. The plan will be to do Module 10 next week, and then we would have a review and the test. Typically we'll go 10 modules to make the 11th one bonus, or the 11th one I believe has some review materials on it. And so we will be offering the exam on the 6th, and then the following week on the 13th is the last day. And so this day would typically be a mercy day. So you can turn in any outstanding assignments, make sure you have everything done, and then that would complete the course. Okay, that ends the recording for this video. I'm going to stop recording it. Try.